This story begins in one very remote place, namely the home of the Marquis of Keratin. The maids, who had been doing their work since morning, suddenly began to talk over the latest news. One of the maids was very concerned, for the Marquis and Marquise had not been seen at all lately, and so she concludes that they are indeed missing. Her partner asked in surprise if she really thought they were missing, but the girl said she wasn't sure. She had heard about it, though, and apparently, since they were nowhere to be seen, they were. Another maid, who was sweeping near the curtains, suddenly went over and removed a small jewel from there, and hid it in her hands so that no one would notice. She herself at this point, hearing them in conversation, thought that of course they were not missing, but simply dead. And throughout the time she went and cleaned around the house, then collected the various gems that were everywhere. In fact, it wouldn't be long before this whole family would collapse. A girl can talk about the future with such incredible confidence because this world is inside one very famous novel. And as in most cases of getting to another world, she died as a result of a ridiculous fall from a roof. And on the eve of her death, she decided to finally read the famous fantasy novel after all. This novel is called Unforgivable Sin. And when the girl woke up, she found herself in this very place. Looking in the mirror, she just couldn't believe her eyes for a while that this was really happening. This novel features one of the main characters named Joshua Ron Keratin. He is the heir to the Marquis family with a very long and confusing history at some points. However, his life since childhood was just a series of endless failures, and as a result, he was able to find the man who pushed his life into hell and took revenge on him. This is what is the main plot of this novel, the revenge of the main character. However, the main problem for the girl is that his issue was finished only in the middle, so she cannot know what will happen next. But in any case, the important detail is precisely that the beginning of these failures begins right now, in the time in which exactly the girl has fallen. The workers complained very often about the territories, a tone that was unable to provide them with wages because of the disappearance of the awnings. Joshua himself and his twin sister were sent to the village. Of course, those small and innocent children who needed care and affection were simply ignored. Even after a while, they were no longer provided with food, so they were left to fend for themselves. The girl, of course, understands everything, but it remains a mystery to her how innocent children could be starved to death. That's why the girl, as soon as she entered this world, she immediately began to cook them Korean food that she couldn't forget from her past life. She gave them a dish every day so that the poor children would not go hungry. Sure enough, for a few days she managed to help them, and she would have continued to do so if it hadn't been said that all the people who helped them died prematurely. She would have definitely cared for them even more. The girl at that moment returned to her room and began to hide the jewelry she had managed to accumulate during the day in her suitcase. And she thought about the fact that there was nothing she could do, because one death at a young age was enough. So she doesn't want to make the same mistake again. In fact, she was successful once she got into the place and didn't get confused about the novel and the events that happen and are supposed to happen. That's why right now, all she has to do is take charge of her future and set off on a new journey with the charms she's collecting every day. The girl, of course, realizes that it's all wrong and immoral, but she thinks of it as a substitute for unpaid wages. And soon, the moment for which the girl had been waiting for so long finally came. One of the maids came running to them and said that all the staff should gather in one room because someone wanted to make an announcement. When all were assembled, a man came out to them and asked that the girls be quiet, for he could not outshout them. He also said that he was delivering an announcement from the representative of His Highness the Duke, so everyone should listen carefully and memorize. Then the man unfolded a huge sheet of paper and began to read out sentences stating that due to the disappearance of the head of the family, Marquis Keratin, it had become very difficult for the family to fulfill its duties. And so all the privileges and duties of the Lord are suspended, and the succession of the title is postponed indefinitely, because the heir to the title of head of the family is still very young. And until he is of a suitable age, Keratin Manor will be under the management of the Duke's royal family. When the man closed his paper and said that this is why all the servants who are present in this room will be dismissed. When the maids and other servants heard this, they were shocked, for they had not expected that such a thing was even possible. Soon they went back to their rooms and began to resent it. They did not understand why they were being dismissed so abruptly, and whether they would ever be paid for the time they had already worked. The very girl who got caught up in the affair was not surprised that they were being kicked out, for she knew it beforehand. However, she really resents the fact that they were fired without paying a single coin. Therefore, it was very good for her that she had managed to pack the jewelry in advance, despite her tormented conscience, because otherwise, she simply wouldn't have been able to survive in the future. The girl went to bed and asked the others to shut up and go to bed. The maids were a little surprised at her behavior, but decided not to provoke her and just ignore her. The girl, in fact, was even very glad that nobody cared about her at all, and very soon, namely in a night, her new life could begin, and she could escape from the plot of the novel because she had waited so long for this day, so she was very glad. She slept for a very long time, but woke up because the sun began to shine directly into her eyes. The girl was not sad, but on the contrary, very happy. As soon as she opened her eyes, she stretched out on her bed and thought happily about the fact that she was finally able to get a good night's sleep, since she had gone to bed early last night. She quickly made herself some tea and wished herself a good morning. But as soon as she looked around, she noticed that it was too quiet. But she wasn't really surprised, because as expected, the maids had already taken all their things, so the dining room was a bit of a mess. The girl finished her tea quickly and went to get her suitcase, thinking that she should probably pack a little too. She also decided that in the future she would never do anything wrong and would start over with a clean heart and conscience. But at this moment, when she opened the suitcase, she was incredibly surprised, for there lay only a few of her ragged and old things. Eugenia was simply furious. She was ready to scream if she hadn't been so surprised, because the suitcase didn't contain the jewelry she'd been collecting all this time. Before long, the power of speech finally returned to her, and she began to run quickly around the room, peering into various corners, asking where her jewelry had gone in the first place. And when she searched the whole room twice after a few minutes, she sat tired on the floor and couldn't believe that the jewelry must have really been stolen by someone. But at that moment she remembered the events that were soon to take place, and she realized that now was not a good time to lose herself. The girl quickly changed into her uniform and searched a few more rooms. However, there was nothing there either. She ran straight down the corridors, thinking that she had to pick up something quickly so that she wouldn't leave with empty pockets. Eugenia at this moment remembered that she might check the Marquise's room, for there might be at least a little jewel left there. The girl began to search the room quickly. However, she could not find anything. In fact, the owner of this body led a very loose life and constantly spent money that she didn't even have. And now, as she moved into the body of the maid, she thought about the fact that she needed to save a little and save something for a rainy day, because you never know what can happen in life. Eugenia continued to search the whole room in search of even a small pebble of preciousness, so that she could live for the first time. However, she couldn't find anything, and at that moment, suddenly the door to the room creaked open, and a childish voice was heard saying that apparently stealing was a habitual thing for the girl. She could still tell from the voice who it was, but as she looked at the boy in front of her with horror, she realized that it was indeed a young gentleman. Seeing his displeased face, she began to tell him that it wasn't what he thought it was. That boy was little Joshua Ron Keratin. The boy indignantly said he didn't need her ridiculous excuses, and wondered if she was thinking of running away like the rest of the servants. Eugenia lowered her head down just to avoid looking him in the eye, but she herself was in shock. She didn't know what to do now. The girl decided that the best way would be a good old-fashioned apology. She fell to her knees and began to apologize to the young master. After that, Eugenia got up from her knees and started to run away quickly. However, the boy grabbed her by her skirt and held her as hard as he could. She said that she would already go and did not want to disturb him. But Joshua continued to hold her, saying that he had more things he wanted to say to her. The girl then asked if he would just let go in that case and say what he wanted to say. But Joshua realized that she would just run away. Eugenia then said that she promised that she wouldn't run away. For a few more minutes they continued to fight, but soon Joshua was completely tired and sat down on the couch, breathing heavily. The boy turned to her and told her not to stand but to sit down. But Eugenia said she couldn't do that. Then Joshua couldn't stand it and started yelling, saying that he told her to sit down and wondered if she thought he was being funny and joking around. The girl realized it was best not to mess with him, so she sat down immediately. And then Joshua wondered why she hadn't left like the others, since they'd already taken everything they could sell and run away long ago. Then he looked at her intently and wondered if she had stayed specially to steal something else. Eugenia did not answer anything, because of course she could not tell the truth that all this time gradually stole diamonds. But they had been stolen from her, and that was why she had stayed in this place. For a while they just sat there in silence. Then Joshua exhaled heavily and said that he really wanted to thank her for feeding them. The girl at this point was very surprised. She didn't really realize that he knew it was her. So the girl said that it was nothing, because she was just doing what anyone else would do in her place. After all, she is a servant, and it is her duty. The guy was surprised, but wondered if she really thought it was her job to secretly bring them food every night, when everyone else didn't even think to do it. Eugenia was silent for a while, choosing the right words. After that, she said that she did it only because she thought it was right to serve him. However, she apologized if it was unpleasant for them. She also said that it was an honor to work for the Marquis of Carrington family. Then the girl was about to become, saying that she thought it was time for her to leave as well. But at that moment Joshua slammed his fist on the table and told her to wait and not to rush so much. Then he suddenly began to shout angrily at her, saying that he had not yet told her what he wanted to tell her. He had told her from the beginning that he needed to talk to her, but why she always wanted to run away from him, he didn't understand. Then Joshua couldn't contain his emotions and asked if she really thought that if the commoners ignored the aristocrats, they could get away with it. But at that moment, the guy realized he'd said it for nothing and, seeing her startled face, stammered and lowered his head and replied that that wasn't really what he'd meant to say. He explained that it wasn't like she was bullying them like the other servants, so she didn't deserve to hear those nasty things. Joshua also said that he thought she was the only one who didn't despise them, and maybe really from the heart somehow cared. Eugenia was trying to keep a nonchalant face at this moment, but it was actually hard for her to do so, because she could feel how desperate this little boy was. However, she was just going to listen to him one last time and leave at last. When he had finished speaking, the girl crouched down to be on the same level with him, and looking him straight in the eye, told the young gentleman that it was all right and he could talk. She would be sure to listen to him. Joshua rubbed himself for a while, for he had not expected that a girl could speak in such a calm and soothing voice. Well then, he gathered his thoughts and said that pretty soon they might be taken away by the knights of the duchy, and then they could offer no resistance, and the men of the duchy would rule them as they pleased. He also knows that in such a situation there will be no one who wants to take care of them. People will just control them like pawns in their great chess game. That's why he said they could use Eugenia and her sister's help to avoid it. The girl was confused when she heard this. She wondered if he was really saying that they could use her help, but she really didn't understand why she was so worried about those little children. Well put his hand on her chest and stepped closer to her, looking her straight in the eye with his big yellow and tear-filled eyes, and asked Eugenia to be their guardian. Hearing this, the girl was furious. She didn't really put it out there, but her mind was screaming. She couldn't believe that he could actually suggest such a thing at all. After a while of silence, she questioned if he was really saying that, and also wondered if she had heard that he wanted her to be their guardian. Eugenia also wondered if her hearing had already begun to fail, although she was not so old that she had a problem with it. But the boy interrupted her and said that there was absolutely nothing wrong with his hearing, and that she had not heard anything. Then he said he would repeat everything to her again, and asked that she listen to him carefully. Joshua even started to speak louder so that the girl would definitely hear him, and said that he was saying that he would like the girl to become their guardian. For Eugenia, these words were like a stab in the back, and she couldn't believe that this was really happening. She even fell on her knees and turned to the young master and said that it would be very difficult for a simple maid like her to fulfill such a request. But the boy didn't really see that as a problem. He asked if he understood that she was going to run away anyway, but without waiting for an answer, he said that she could take him and Sister Selly for one thing. The girl exhaled heavily and said that it was actually much easier said than actually performed, and she herself didn't realize how desperate he must be to ask such a thing of a mere servant girl. She decided that in such a terrible situation, instead of making up some ridiculous excuse, she would just honestly confess to Joshua. Eugenia then explained that in order for her to be able to take care of him and the young mistress, as well as hide from the eyes of the Duke's family, she needed some amount of money. However, she had not received her paycheck for months, not a single coin, not even from the amount she was supposed to be paid. Eugenia also said that if he or the young lady got sick or injured in such a horrible situation, she would not be able to take them to the hospital or provide them with quality medicine. Joshua at this point put his head down so she couldn't see his tears and said in a shaky voice that he understood exactly what she was trying to say. The girl wanted to calm him down somehow already, but then she realized that she couldn't answer just because of simple sympathy, so she bowed and apologized to the young lord. Eugenia realized that it was not her place to take the children from this place, but Eileen Blair's. Although Eileen had a rich background, she was still the youngest daughter of the Baron's broken family. As a consequence, the girl, of course, could not find a party in secular society, and only after becoming an adult she was able to work exclusively as a teacher at home. It didn't suit her very well. But in a situation like this, the girl had no choice, so she had to enjoy what she had. Time had passed since then, and she was able to settle into a family with a rather high reputation, namely, the family of the Marquis of Keratin. And so while teaching the twin heirs, she was able to bond with them. However, just 6 months ago, she was taken and dismissed when the financial situation of the Marquis family began to deteriorate further. After this incident, Eileen took a job as a caregiver for an elderly lady who lived in a distant province. And when she heard the news of the Marquis's family, she immediately became anxious and returned for a meeting with those children to whom she had already become attached, and that meeting was just about to take place on this very day. That is why Eugenia cannot agree and become the guardian of these children. If she acts in her own way, the story will deviate from the original plot. The girl started toward the door and told the young one that it would be better if she went already. But at that moment something strange happened. Eugenia heard the bells begin to ring outside the window. She immediately looked there and could not believe that it was really time already. However, she did not understand why the guy was still here. In fact, the girl who should become the guardian of these children should have come even before the bell rang. So Eugenia quickly grabbed the boy's hand and told him that he had to go already. Joshua was very frightened and asked where she was taking him. But the girl didn't want to explain anything and said they didn't have time for that. The boy didn't want to go anywhere and grabbed the furniture that was nearby. He asked Eugenia in surprise why she was now suddenly acting so strangely. It even frightened him. But with each sound of the beating of the bell, she imagined lying already in her grave and hearing her bell of life. When she suddenly became very serious and asked the boy if he and the young mistress had stayed in the secret place all this time. The guy looked at her in surprise at this point and asked how she even knew all this. Eugenia realized that she might make a big mistake now, so she quickly made an excuse, saying that when she brought them food, she saw that they were going somewhere, so she wondered where this secret place was after all. Joshua hesitated for a while. Then suddenly he thought of a plan he could use to get his way. He turned to the girl and asked if she would become their guardian if he told her. Eugenia suddenly began to moo. She didn't understand why it was so complicated, but she knew she couldn't delay. The guy at that moment asked what it was she was saying, for he didn't understand a word. Then the girl shouted, and with a smile strained on her face said that she would. Only they had to go as soon as possible. Joshua began to glow with joy. He said he was taking her at her word, because she'd promised. Then he asked if he understood that if he took her to the secret place, she'd take him and Sally with her. Eugenia knew that it wouldn't end well, but she still had to promise after all. She had hoped that when Eileen came, they would go with her. They would choose some simple maid. The boy happily grabbed her hand and began to lead her to the exit, saying that he trusted her and would take her to the secret place. The girl was actually glad that she had managed to do it. They stepped out into the hallway, and then Eugenia wondered if this place was far away. But Joshua replied that not at all. They needed to go forward and then turn the corner. Then Joshua, after walking a few more meters, suddenly stopped near the wall and said it was there. The girl looked at it in surprise and didn't realize if it was really in such a strange location right under the stairs. The guy tapped on the wall at that moment, and soon the door began to open. He pulled back the special curtains so that she could see what was inside. Then Joshua stepped aside and said that this was the secret place they'd been hiding in all along. It was actually quite a large room, with a special lamp and various small things on the closet. There was also a soft-looking bed. When Eugenia saw it, she was very surprised. She didn't even expect their secret place to be so close, so hidden room. There were toys on the thin blanket and cookie crumbs everywhere. Joshua, who was very proud to have such a secret place, asked how she was doing and also wondered if everything was perfectly done. The girl was actually really surprised that they had such a place. However, she was also very sad that the children could not enjoy themselves in their rooms like that. After all, it was the adults who made the mistake, but for some reason it was the innocent children who suffered. At that moment she heard another loud sound. It was, as she realized, the last bell. Now Eugenia was very glad that it rang just in time. After all, it meant that Eileen would be coming very soon. She thought about it for a moment. But then Joshua's voice broke her from her thoughts. He looked at her in surprise and asked what was wrong. He had already called her several times, and she had blinked her eyes at him. The girl laughed nervously and said that it was really all right. She hadn't expected to be so deep in her own thoughts that she hadn't even heard his voice the first time. Joshua suddenly looked at her questioningly and said that she was starting to act strange and wondered if she was even listening to him. The girl immediately said that of course she was listening to the young gentleman. But the guy suddenly began to protest and said that of course she was not listening. But in fact, when someone speaks, one must necessarily listen to him, and he does not understand why all adults are so impolite. Eugenia was a little surprised at such his behavior, but asked for forgiveness. Then the girl looked carefully into that room and saw that on the soft bed lay some little beautiful girl. The maid knew at once that it was young Mistress Selmia. She was just about to ask the boy where she was, but there she was, sleeping peacefully. So Eugenia decided that she was very lucky that she didn't have to look for her for a long time. But when the girl was about to say something, Joshua suddenly hissed and said that Selmia was very sick, so he asked her not to wake her. Eugenia immediately said that of course she would not make any noise. Then the boy went up to his sister and taking her hand, said that before his daddy disappeared, he had made him a promise that he would definitely protect Selly. The boy also said that even though he wasn't with them now, Joshua still had to keep his promise, because he was her big brother. When the girl heard this, she felt very sad. She didn't understand why, if it was a fictional story, but young children had such severe hardships in their lives. In fact, the girl also thought about the fact that if she could somehow occupy the body of a non-servant aristocrat, she doesn't even know if she would help them. She suddenly started backing away, and when Joshua noticed this, he suddenly looked at her in surprise. He covered his sister with a blanket and said he was very afraid she would run away from them and not keep her promise. Eugenia actually didn't even realize that one movement could cause such a reaction, so she decided that she needed to be careful not to worry him for nothing. The girl came closer to him, took his hands in hers, and smiled, saying that she would not run away, but Joshua was already upset and turned away, saying she was lying. Then Eugenia said in the sweetest voice that she wasn't lying. She was standing too close to the young mistress, so she just stepped back so as not to accidentally wake her up. And she didn't even have any thoughts of running away. She got up and said she would go and sit under the other side. The boy then replied that he would sit next to her. The girl asked in surprise if he was really sure he was ready to do that, because it was very cold outside. But Joshua still insisted and said he could sit there too. The girl giggled at that moment, and he looked at her in surprise and asked why she was laughing all of a sudden, if she didn't think he could do it. Eugenia said not at all. She only giggled because he was very nice, and she didn't even think anything like that. When the guy heard this, he was straight up horrified. He grimaced and asked why she thought he was cute. Joshua protested and said that he wasn't cute at all, and he certainly wasn't old enough for everyone to think he was. Eugenia continued to giggle and said that of course she knew that, and the boy confirmed his words and added that he was actually grown up now. The girl replied that it was fine. she understood, and she wouldn't call him cute anymore. Then they went outside and sat there. The girl realized that when Eileen came, she wouldn't have a chance to see his face like that again. Still mentally, Eugenia mouthed that he was very nice, but she knew she couldn't stay. Unfortunately, if becomes part of the story, something bad could happen, and it would be the right decision to give just that much help and leave. It was already beginning to get dark outside, and the girl realized for sure to herself that this was how it was supposed to be. Then, looking around, she did not understand why the protagonist did not come for so long. Assumed that, most likely, it was necessary to wait a little longer, but with every hour it was getting darker and colder. Then Eugenia did not understand why the heroine still did not come. It became so dark outside that you could even see the stars, and she was just furious, not understanding where the heroine was. Eugenia was getting nervous that Eileen was not coming. She didn't know what to do, and probably she should keep waiting, but she didn't want to do that, because it would be a waste of time if she didn't show up at all. And honestly, she really doesn't want to take responsibility for the children, but she also doesn't want to die again. She even had thoughts of just leaving everything behind and running away, and she didn't even care that she had no money to live on. But then suddenly she thought of the small children who would be all alone, and they were too young to provide for themselves. So Eugenia was even frightened at the thought that they might die because she would just leave. The girl was on the verge of crying, but she pulled herself together and turned to the young gentleman and said that she had something to say, because it was very important. The boy looked at her in surprise and asked what it was. Eugenia hesitated for a while, but then said that she really didn't have enough money and wondered if they had some. Joshua looked at her in surprise and asked if she really needed money. Then he quickly returned to his sister's room and said that he didn't want to ask for everything for nothing either. He realized that he would need his own price for it. The girl watched his actions in surprise and didn't understand what he meant. But at that moment Joshua pulled his sister close and apologized, saying that he would look under her pillow for a moment. The girl, who was still sleepy and sick, didn't understand what was going on and said she was actually asleep. But her brother apologized again and said that he was just for a second. Then he took something out from under the pillow and, approaching Elena, gave her some precious and incredibly beautiful jewelry. Eugenia looked at all this in surprise and asked the young gentleman where he got such precious things. Joshua then replied that he had actually secretly hidden the largest of his mother's gems, and it would be a shame if other servants found out about them and just took them away like that. The girl looked at the boy in surprise, and after that at the jewelry, she couldn't believe it was real. Of course she couldn't accept it, because it was the only thing the twins had left from their dead parents. Plus, these jewelry pieces have a heraldic lily painted on them which symbolizes their entire family. When sold, they would be considered stolen property, which would obviously cause even more anger. In this case, she is left with only one thing, which was also given to her by her boyfriend. It was a ring with a stone inside. Eugenia began to examine it and realized that it had a fake stone. And according to what she had read, the marquise had been cheated at the jewelry shop when she bought it. Of course, the girl couldn't tell the guy that the ring was just a fake, but she didn't know what to do and how to get out of this situation. When Joshua saw her worried face, he said that he wasn't really asking her to take responsibility for them for the rest of her life. He said confidently that he just wanted her to take them to the Empire of Ace to Duke Horatius's house, and if she did, all the jewelry would be hers. He got a little sad, and then explained that the previous Duchess was their grandmother's sister, and it was only to the Duke's house, Eugenia, that he wanted her to take them. Joshua straight up begged her. He was even willing to get on his knees for the girl to agree to do it. The guy had no other choice. Then Eugenia, seeing his spread face, handed over the jewelry and said she was returning it to him. She kept only the fake ring, and smiling replied that she thought it alone would be enough for her. Joshua was about to object, but she said she promised she would take them to Duke Horatius's house and asked if he believed her. She kept that fake ring. After all, if she kept at least it, Joshua would be at peace. So the guy, overjoyed, said he trusted her and would be very happy to have her accompany her. Then they shook each other's little fingers as a sign of their vows in words. But then suddenly Joshua took his little finger very quickly and offered to draw up a contract to make sure that exactly everything was honored. Eugenia was very surprised to hear this. At that moment, the boy went back to his secret place and found a paper. He brought her a sheet of paper, on which everything was written, and said that she could sign down there. The girl could not understand why she thought she had been fooled. She began to study the document and asked if it was really necessary to sign such a document. But then she saw the clause that the penalty for non-compliance would be 1,000,000 gold pieces. Eugenia couldn't believe that there would be such a big fine for some fake ring. The guy, holding back his emotions, said it was just to be on the safe side because there was such a possibility that she might suddenly want to leave them. The girl was very surprised, and taking the pen, said that she had not even thought of such a thing, so she would sign everything right now. Soon everything was signed and she gave him the paper. The guy was immediately happy about it and wanted to say something to her. But Eugenia interrupted him and said that she also had a condition. Joshua immediately stopped and asked what that condition was. She sternly said that she wanted them to call her their sister from now on. The boy was very surprised and asked why that was necessary. Well, Eugenia explained that they needed to be prepared for unknown dangers, so they would disguise themselves as brother and sister who had a big age difference. She also wondered if he now understood. Joshua put the piece of paper in his pocket and said he didn't want to and didn't understand why he suddenly had to call her that. The girl then pulled away from him and said that in that case, she would not go with him. Joshua had nothing else to do. He didn't understand why she refused to go because of such a small thing. But he understood and said he agreed. And at the end, a little embarrassed, he even blushed, but he called her his sister nonetheless. Then Eugenia, rejoicing, suggested that she should already begin in that case to prepare for departure, so as not to lose much time. Quite some time had passed since then, and the next day had come. So it was that the young people had finally arrived. They put on their cloaks so as not to attract much attention, and soon reached a village that was not far from the border. She had to sell everything left in the mansion. In fact, it was quite a lot of trouble to leave that place. After all, it was also necessary to find a village from which to cross the border of the empire, and so she had to search on foot for some means of transportation. Soon the children moved away from Eugenia, turning to their brother in amazement, saying that they had finally come to the hotel where they would be staying. But Joshua, as he strongly guarded his sister, told her not to go alone, for it might be too dangerous in that place. In fact, it was said in the novel that the killer, upon learning about the twins, immediately attacked them and didn't even take pity on Eileen, but brutally killed her. That is why the girl proposed to add one very important condition to their contract, according to which the twins must pretend that Eugenia is their older sister. So it was universally decided to call them both by their first names and by a special nickname, so that there would be no misunderstandings, and in case of anything they could hide. Soon they went inside and finally settled in. At this point, Eugenia made the best decision so they wouldn't be conspicuous. She recolored their bright blue hair. The children now had hair the color of a raven's wing. Joshua didn't like it very much, and he looked in the mirror and wondered if the color would wash off at all. The girl started to put on her cloak because she was going somewhere, and said that later it could be rinsed off with water. And even if it didn't, his hair would still start to grow back, so he might not worry too much about it. Joshua was still unhappy, because he didn't like the way he looked with this hair color. His sister, on the other hand, was very happy, because she loved the color and thought it suited her. Then the guy suddenly saw that Eugenia was going somewhere, and immediately asked where she was going. The girl explained that she was going to earn money. Joshua, hearing this, was very surprised and asked why she needed the money. Didn't she sell that ring, or was she already able to spend such a large sum on something? Eugenia realized that she couldn't tell them the truth. After a little thought, the girl said that the more money they had, the better. Then she said that she would be on her way, and they must not go out without her. Then the guy frowned and said, "Okay, he knows perfectly well himself." His sister, on the other hand, looked at Eugenia joyfully at that moment. Then Sally ran up to the girl and hugged her, calling her sis, but also inquired if she could go along with her. The girl said that she was very cramped in the place, and her brother kept telling her to sit quietly and stay out of the way. Joshua, hearing this, was outraged and asked when he had said that to her. Sally hid behind Eugenia's skirt and said that he wouldn't even let her open the window after all. At that moment, Eugenia thought about the fact that they had to wear a special cape all this time, and they were probably very tired of it. So she sat down to look the girl in the eyes and told her that she would work hard today, so she would buy her favorite candy. When Sally heard that, she was very surprised. Then the girl said that she would bring her candy. In return, she asked her to sit and wait a little longer. The girl agreed and said she really liked the lemon ones, so she wouldn't mind waiting. For their sake, Eugenia said that so-and-so would buy these candies for her. Sally heard this and was very glad. She liked to call her sister, so she addressed her that way again and said that she would wait quietly for her return. Eugenia patted her on the head and said that she was a good girl and that she would be back soon. No doubt she said all this with very great enthusiasm, but in fact she had absolutely no energy at all. In fact, a special pass is required for passage. However, Eugenia thinks that because of the deteriorated relations with the duchy and the empire, it will be very hard for her to get one. And besides, if you think about it that way, there might not be enough money to spend on bribes, medicines in case the children are sick, food expenses, overnight accommodation, and other things. So Eugenia quickly ran to the labor exchange, and as soon as she rushed in, she immediately said that she wanted very much to get a job. The man who was the receptionist at the place was very surprised by her push and even choked on his tea. After that, he pointed to the side and said that there were job advertisements there. The girl calmed down a little and thanked him for the information. Then Eugenia went straight to this message board and started looking for something that might suit her. She was considering and going over various options in her head, but then she suddenly realized that something was wrong with this place, because it was too quiet compared to how it should be. Then she looked to the side and saw a lot of people sitting around the table discussing something suddenly become silent and just stared at her. But seeing what she noticed them, they immediately turned away and went back to their conversations. In fact, Eugenia was even frightened for a moment because of the silence that hung over her. She realized that she needed to find a suitable job as soon as possible. There were options for peeling vegetables and delivering groceries, but nowhere paid more than 5 gold pieces, and that was too little for her. But then suddenly, looking through once again written notes, she saw a very interesting variant. Eugenia tore off a sheet with an advertisement that said someone was looking for an employee maid to escort to the Ace Empire. Remuneration would be assessed based on the greater distance. Bargaining was also possible. That's when Eugenia realized that this was what she needed. She went back to the receptionist, who was choking on his tea again because she was too loud, and putting the sheet on his desk, said she wanted the job. The man again wiped his mouth, which was stained with tea, and asked if she really wanted to do it. Eugenia calmly replied that yes, it was necessary, and she definitely needed it. And if not her, then no one else. The man was very surprised by such behavior of the girl. After all, he had never met such a girl before, and did not understand what kind of a bizarre miss she was. Well then, he went about his duties. He took out a piece of paper and said that since there had been no applicants for a month, he was thinking of taking this ad down right now. It was very good that she had decided to take the job after all. So he told her to hurry up and get going soon. Eugenia was very happy that she had no competitors. It meant that she was definitely suitable and would be hired. So after receiving the coordinates of the house she should come to, the girl immediately went there. After looking around, she was very surprised and didn't expect that it would really be in such a beautiful place. Even though it was a bit inconvenient for her to get to this place, but it was still very good that the house was like a hotel. According to the administrator, the ad hung for a month, but still no one took it. This made her a little wary. However, she could not find another good option. The administrator also told her that he had asked why people didn't hire anyone. However, he never got an answer to that. After all, there were quite a lot of candidates before, but now no one even looks at the ad anymore. But since Eugenia had no other way, she should still go in and try. So she rang the special bell at the door to be let into the house. Soon the door opened, and she saw an elderly woman. Eugenia said hello and said she had come to see Mr. Elvery. When the woman heard this, she was very surprised at first, but then she remembered who she was talking about. She was also surprised and asked if she had really seen the vacancy notice, and when Eugenia nodded, the woman told her to follow her. They went up the stairs, and the girl inquired whether she had heard of this gentleman at all, for if she did get hired, the woman might even congratulate her. Eugenia answered nothing to this, only smiled. Soon they got up to the right door, and the woman said it could be a little loud in here, so she advised her to plug her ears. The girl was very surprised, not understanding why she had to cover her ears. But at that moment, an elderly woman came to the door and started shouting loudly, urging Mr. Elvery to open the door. Eugenia didn't understand what was going on or why she was screaming like that. But the woman didn't stop knocking and only raised her voice each time, telling him he should open up. Then a man's voice was heard telling her not to yell, and the door opened. A man with green hair appeared and asked the girl what was wrong. Eugenia explained to him what the matter was, and then he turned to her, asking if she had indeed seen the vacancy notice. He introduced himself, saying that his name was Elvery, and that he was very happy to meet her. The girl looked at him in surprise, not realizing if it was really the employer, but then she shook his hand and told him that it was nice to meet him too, and gave him her name. Eugenia was very surprised, because the employer was much younger than she had imagined. But then Elvery asked her to enter the room first, because she had to be interviewed. When they entered the room, Eugenia was shocked, for she could not distinguish it even from a pigsty. Everything around was scattered, to him, and dirty. The man would be a little alarmed, for he hadn't expected to meet guests of hers on this day, so he didn't even clean up. Then he started putting away those papers and said she could just sit down anywhere she wanted. Eugenia, at this point, cleared a bit of the bed for herself and sat down there. Then the man moved a small table in order to talk. He looked very serious. We corrected his glasses and said that's where they would start the interview, and also asked if she knew exactly what job she had come to him for. Eugenia was a little alarmed and surprised, but then confidently said that surely she knew everything. She explained that the advertisement said they needed a maid to accompany them to Ace's empire. Elvery, hearing this, said that it was all right, but no matter how close the country was, it was necessary to cross the border. He also asked if she was comfortable with that. Eugenia replied that she was certainly satisfied with it, and she does not see any problems in this work. The man continued to be very serious, and said that she was somehow special, because usually people avoid tasks that involve long distances. When the girl heard that, she was even wary. She didn't understand if he had accidentally mentioned the word assignment, but she realized that she needed the job, so she said he could take it easy. She originally had a job in Ace's empire, so she should go there too. In that case, he asked Eugenia if she had ever been there. The girl said she had not, and if he hired her, it would be her first trip in her life. Then Elver asked, in that case, if she had ever worked at all as a servant. Eugenia said that yes, she had experience in serving a lord. So in that she was not inferior to anyone else. The man thought for a while. He finally decided to think over her candidacy. And Eugenia at this moment thought about the fact that he could give her any task. She will show her skills as a resident of modern society in Korea. The girl was already so serious that she was even ready to do a dance in front of him or cook an incredible dish in 2 minutes. But suddenly the man said cheerfully that he would hire her in that case. And when Eugenia heard that, she was even a little confused. She didn't expect it to be so easy and thought that she would have to prove her skills. Avery got up from the table and said that he would have to go very soon, and since there were no other candidates, he was in distress. So she was a good candidate for the role, especially when there were no others. Eugenia said she now understood everything, but she would also like to ask him for a concession and asked if it would be possible to increase the number of companions on the road a bit. The man was a little surprised. He hadn't expected her to want to go with anyone else. And then, turning around, asked how much of a person she wanted to zoom in on. The girl replied that there would only be 2 of them. She has a younger brother and sister. However, they no longer have a guardian other than her, so she just has to take them along with her. Avery hesitated, but Eugenia knew there was no way she could have him say no. So she came closer to him and told him that although they were still small children, they were not at an age where they needed a lot of attention, and she could make sure that they would not disturb him in any way during this trip. The man hesitated for a moment, and then said that he didn't think that this was a matter he had the right to decide. Eugenia was surprised and thought, how could it not be him who would decide? Because he was the employer. But Elvire went to the exit, and when he opened the door he said that now he would call his partner. But he changed his mind and replied that now she could meet the master and tell him whatever she wanted. Hearing this, Eugenia was a little surprised. However, went straight after him to the so-called gentleman. Now it became clear to her that he was not the employer after all. But it was obvious, because he was too frivolous and windy. As they climbed even higher up the stairs, the girl inquired of the Lord if there was anything she should still take into consideration. Elvire wondered what else she should know, and then he told her not to inquire about the identity of her employers. When she was alone, not to bother him. He also asked if these 2 pieces of advice would be enough for her. The girl was glad to have some information, and said that of course it would be enough for her. But the girl at that moment thought about the fact that it was actually very elementary advice, and the more she thought about this mysterious person, the scarier it became. She didn't understand why in all this long time they hadn't found any suitable candidate for this position. The interview was very simple. They didn't even go into detail, and the girl didn't know if everything would be all right at all when she did get the job. But at that moment, Elvire stopped at the door and, knocking on the door, told the gentleman that another candidate had come. There was no reply to that. Then the man opened the door and pulled the girl inside, telling her to come in. Eugenia was very surprised and asked how it was so, because he had not even authorized it yet, and wondered if it was even possible to do so. Well, the man said, of course she could do that. So the girl bowed and apologized, but at that moment the doors slammed shut and she was left all alone. Looking around, Eugenia realized that this room was too dark and she couldn't see anything at all. She went forward to fumble for something, but the curtains were closed and she couldn't make out anything. The girl at that moment even thought that there must be some child of darkness at attention. But at that moment she suddenly stopped, because she heard someone's voice. It was very stern and rough. The voice said that there was a chair in front of her, so she could sit on it. Eugenia decided not to resist, so she immediately sat down on the chair. She thought that it was probably her employer, so it would be better to listen to his advice. As soon as the girl sat down in the chair, she apologized for presenting herself late, and also gave her name, saying that she had come to work as a maid for him. The employer did not answer anything. Then the girl asked how she could address him. He remained silent for a while. Then he said that his name was Enric. The girl still couldn't see his face, and said that in that case, she would call him Enric. She also apologized again for saying it on their first meeting. But she wanted her younger brother and sister to go on the trip with her. They are twins. The girl said that her sister was very ill, and since she would be going to a country larger than this one, she wanted to go to a doctor to have him examine her carefully and perhaps give some diagnosis in order to cure her. The man at that moment got off his sofa, which was opposite the girl, and went to the lamp and began to light candles on it. Eugenia continued talking and said that if he allowed it, she would agree even to a low payment for this work. She wanted to say something else, but at that moment the candles were lit, and she saw the stranger standing with his back to her. It surprised her a little, for she had not expected him to be like that. And at that moment Enric turned to face her, adjusting his gloves. The girl was so impressed, she hadn't expected him to be so handsome. Eugenia thought at that moment that if she had such a face, her mood would rise every time she looked at herself in the mirror. But at that moment she was alarmed by the fact that this man was coming closer and closer to her with each passing second, and she did not understand why he was doing it at all. He leaned closer to her and said in a mysterious voice that for some reason she looked very familiar to him, and asked if they had met anywhere before. Eugenia's heart began to beat at a frantic pace as he came closer and closer to her. She felt uncomfortable, and at that moment she thought that it was really a ride to her. But when she looked at his eyes, she realized that given the look in his eyes, it was very unlikely. So she cocked her head to the side and said it was the first time she'd seen him in this place. Enric wondered in surprise and asked if that was really the case. But in that case, he didn't understand why her face was so familiar to him. Eugenia, at this point, was furious. She did not understand how she should know it. But then suddenly, after a short silence, he said that he had seen her somewhere. And then he remembered and said that of course she was the child abductor. When he said that, all the hatred for the girl and the anger in his eyes could be heard in his voice. Eugenia actually resented this very much. She stood up and asked why he was suddenly calling her a child abductor. The man started to move away from her and asked her how she could not know this, because she was even wanted for this case. The girl was more and more surprised every minute and said that she had never done anything like that, and it was all slander. Enric turned away from her altogether and said that of course it was not for him to judge whether the ad against her was true or not. However, she was still denied employment. When Eugenia heard this, she was confused. She didn't know how this could have happened because she really hadn't done anything wrong. The girl doesn't understand how he can explain this situation to her now. But if he is really telling the truth, she doesn't even know what she should do in a situation like this. She's never been or even heard of such a thing. At this moment, Eugenia clenched her fist tighter. Her hand was trembling like her whole body. But she still remained and tried to make an imperturbable appearance. The man at this moment was still watching her. After a while of silence, he said it would be much easier to hire someone who wasn't in trouble with the law. Eugenia started to leave and said that she totally understood what they were trying to say, so she'd better leave. But before she was out the door, she turned to the man and asked if she could ask just one question, but without waiting for his answer, asked if he would report her presence to the authorities. She said she had told him not too long ago that she had a younger brother and sister. They were still very young children, and if he decided to claim her, she asked that he give her at least some time. Eugenia realized at that moment that she absolutely had to protect Joshua and Selma, at least before the police caught her. But Enric suddenly said that he would not report her to the police. When the girl heard this, she looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is it really true?" The man at this point, however, said that he refused to get into troublesome and burdensome matters with her. However, in return, he asks that the girl fulfill one request of his. He really hopes that she will not say anything about this place, and when he said this phrase, he even got to his feet and looked her straight in the eyes with his frightening gaze. Eugenia said she would keep that in mind, and after that she walked out the door. She stood for a while thinking that this was all too much for her, but it was like he was afraid of something too. Since he's so reluctant to be mentioned anywhere, luckily he won't report the girl. So the best thing for her is to just get out of this place quickly. When she started down the stairs, she saw Mr. Elvira there. She immediately said hello to him, and the man anxiously asked Eugenia if everything had gone well. But the girl said that unfortunately they would not be able to work together. When he heard that, he was very surprised and asked what she meant by that. Did the gentleman refuse her this position? Eugenia laughed nervously and said that this was exactly what had happened. But Elvira suddenly grabbed his head and said that it was very disappointing because he really wanted to work with her. The girl, seeing his reaction, thought that apparently he was even more sorry than she was. Then she said goodbye to him and wished him a good day. The man fell straight to his knees and started wiping his tears and wished her the same. When the girl was out the door, Elvira thought he could not stand it all any longer, so he went quickly upstairs. When he opened the door, he told Enric that he apologized for barging in like that. The man, who at this moment was sitting on the sofa and studying some papers, asked Elvira where his manners even were. But the guy started yelling, "I said it's not a good time to pay attention to something like that," and wondered why he said no after all. The gentleman immediately realized who he was talking about and said that there was a reason. But Elvira came closer to him and said that he really hoped he understood the reason. The man explained that this girl was wanted, and when Elvira heard this, he was incredibly startled. He had expected any reason, but not this one. Enric immediately told him everything he knew and why this particular girl was wanted. But the boy closed his ears and didn't understand how it was possible. He fell to his knees and said it just couldn't be. After all, he remembered her saying she had a younger brother and sister, and asked, "Are those really the children she kidnapped?" Enric, not showing much interest, said that maybe they really are, maybe they aren't, no one knows the truth. Elvira got to his feet and said it was just ridiculous, and I guess really hiring her would be a very big risk for them. The man finally put his papers aside and said that naturally they couldn't contact a person who had been accused of a crime, and that was why he did so. But in truth, Enric was still resentful. He needed to leave the robe as quickly as possible, but the borders were already closed. And the real reason for the closure is that the soldiers of the deposed Crown Duke are still unprotected. And as a result, inspections in the border zone have become much stricter than they used to be. Also, all the entrepreneurs expressed their desire to leave in such a situation. The union of the two foreigners could not help but arouse great suspicion. The number of people is too small to say that they are performing duty. Therein lies Endrick's main problem. That was why he felt that the nobles traveling abroad was the safest option. However, he didn't think that finding just one employee could take so long. Then the man turned to his partner and said that in addition, there was a rather large reward for her. So much so that the announcement sent even to this very distant village, and he wondered if the fellow even understood what it could mean. Elvari thought for a while, then said that apparently she was being chased by someone with an incredibly large amount of power and amount of money. He agreed and said that she could cause them many times more problems, and he didn't want to get bogged down in hassle just because they didn't have time to find a proper chaperone. Elver stood there for a while just thinking, then asked Enric if he could speak one thought. His partner said he could. And then the guy said that he's been very concerned about this since he moved to this country, so he proposes to find Miss Eugenia after all. And if he signs it, he'll take the signature from the girl. When he heard this, he was very surprised, and Enric asked what he had been listening to all that he had just told him. Had he been listening to it all with his nose instead of his ears? At that moment, the man picked up a piece of paper and started crumpling it. Elvire got emotional over his master's anger, and then said he listened, clearly with both ears. That's why he wants the man to listen to the end, and then draw any conclusions afterwards. Guy explained that if she is indeed wanted, she does not want to be caught, and the girl must be very careful in her words and actions. And Enric is very great and strong, and has never failed in strategy. So the guy moved closer to him, whispering that they would just use each other in this situation. Enric, hearing this, hesitated for a moment. Afterward, he sighed heavily and said that he shouldn't have given him a chance to speak after all. After all, as always, it was not a good decision. But the man realizes that he can't deny everything that has been said to Elvira. And if there is more stalling in the future, it can only get worse for them in this place, too. Enric sat there for a while with an indignant look on his face. Then he got up from the couch and told his partner to go look for her. The boy immediately got excited and started to run out of the room, saying that he would go and prepare everything necessary for that. Elvari began to walk quickly down the stairs with a very cheerful look. The man looked at him and wondered if he should reconsider his decision, or if it was the right thing to do. From that moment some time passed, and the weather outside turned bad in a flash. Eugenia walked around the city, and soon it was back to the bureau, and came up. Going to the bulletin board, I saw my face there. The girl really couldn't believe that she was really a wanted criminal, and now she was realizing that the one man really hadn't lied to her. She very much also hoped that no one else in this village of hers knew about her except him. Eugenia quickly reread the ad and noticed that at least this one didn't include Joshua and Celia's name. But she was surprised and didn't understand why that was the case. In fact, this kind of crime usually involves spreading information about the children who are exactly the ones being sought. And based on what the girl had read, it all sounded very much like she was the only one being sought. Eugenia walked over to the bulletin board and began to hide them. Back she thought about the fact that whatever still was the reason for her, for first she needed to get them out of people's sight as soon as possible. After a while everything was finally finished, and the girl was about to go out, as suddenly at the exit she heard a conversation between men. One of them turned to his friend and asked if he had seen the wanted notice from the Crown Duke. The boy immediately said that of course he had seen it, because it was posted in every corner of their village. Then he asked if he could still get the reward if he killed her and cut off her head. His friend said of course you could. You see, it says it's worth 1,000,000 gold pieces. Eugenia was even more upset when she heard this. She realized that people would start hunting her, so she threw her hood over her head. It was still raining heavily outside, and she ran out and quickly ran towards the house, thinking that the situation was incredibly turbulent, so they needed to get away from this place as soon as possible.